Can you talk a little bit about coping skills for
Coping skills.
trauma? Mm,
So, coping skills are temporary. I
mm,
tell people that all the time because people think like, oh, I can just do this breathing exercise. Is going to help me calm down. It'll help you calm down. It'll help you calm down. But this is the thing about coping
mm,
skills. The behaviors that you're doing was once coping skills.
mm.
Because
Yeah.
so, like for example, if I was a person who, when my parents start arguing, I go in my room and lock the door because I want to avoid it. That's a coping strategy. But then
Mm,
what happens is you get older, you and your spouse have a conflict, and then you go in your room and you lock the door and never deal with it.
mm,
So everything that we do to employ stuff are usually a variation of a coping strategy that we use, whether it's negative or positive.
mm,
The real thing is coping strategies will work for a little while,
mm,
but then you have to dig deep and you have to figure out what's the thought process behind stuff. So I like to always use myself as an example. I had like growing up, my dad used to always call me stupid. I was a stupid girl. Like every single day I was stupid.
mm,
So now that I'm older, and say somebody don't have to actually say, Zah, you stupid. They don't have to do that. Say if they do something to me and I feel like they thought I was stupid, that's why they did it. See, mind you, because it's my perception.
mm,
Listen, I always tell people it's always about you. So in my head, I'm like, they must think I'm stupid. So what
mm,
happens is then because I felt like I couldn't protect myself as a child, now I can
mm,
protect myself as an adult because I'm grown. So then I overcompensate
mm,
for the perceived violation.
mm,
But what I'm trying to say is I could
mm,
employ a coping strategy. Hey,
mm.
whenever I'm triggered, I can walk away. Hey, whenever this, I can do that. Those things is great. But then there's the thing about coping strategies is they're great until they no longer work
Work. Gotcha.
because eventually it runs out.
Mm.
And
What's
then
the solution, or what's the
it's,
there?
so you have to start getting down to the why.
Mm,
Because then when you get down to the why, because you know, without me knowing the why, I'm like, oh, you think I'm stupid. I'm about to do X, Y, and Z, whatever it is that I decide to do that whatever people do. But when I start finding out, when I start realizing, like, okay, I feel like this, I'm triggered really badly because growing up, someone always called me stupid. So now when I'm interacting with someone, I'm like, they're not calling me stupid. They're in their own pain. They have their own whatever is going on. And so when you start to change your thought process, eventually you stop thinking like that. When people do stuff, you be like, oh, look at that. That's crazy. Because
mm,
you change your thought process. But
mm.
adding a coping strategy, it only works but for so long. You have to do cognitive restructuring. It is a must. It is imperative that you start doing those things because if not, a coping strategy is going to fail you eventually, just like the coping strategy is failing you now. And is no longer working.
So can you explain a little bit more about the cognitive restructuring of the behavior, changing the behavior?
Well, cognitive restructuring, it starts before the change of the behavior. The behavior by
Mm,
itself is just a coping strategy.
mm,
So we have like different things where it says cognitive therapy and then you have cognitive behavioral therapy. So with coping strategies, that's just behavioral therapies. You're doing one thing and you were doing one thing and you're replacing it with another behavior. So like when the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, follow up a good deed after a bad deed. That is
mm,
behavioral modification. That's you replacing a behavior. So that's coping strategies because eventually it starts to become your norm if you keep doing it. However, if you don't address the cognitive part, eventually it's going to fail you because it's always that shaitan that knows you to say, I know you've been doing good, but they really are playing in your face and think you stupid, and it's just like and you always revert to something that you were used to doing in the past. So like people who like have addictions, and I like addictions best because it's kind of obvious
Mm,
rather than other behavioral stuff. I always tell people that you should find out what people's struggle points were, because
mm,
if things fail, their coping strategies that they used in the past may resurface. So if you had someone who maybe was violent, but they went to rehabilitation, they went to therapy, blah, 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 you got to keep in mind that, hey, this person was violent. That was their coping strategies. If the coping strategies that they employed now fails, they're going to resort back to violence. They're going to
mm,
resort back to drug use. They're going to resort back to um, avoiding situations. They're going to revert back. So you always have to keep that in mind. And that's why I think another reason why people marriages be failing, because they see somebody and say, oh my God, he's cute, he has a nice beard, she's dressed cute, she's sexy, oh look, she's small, tiny, she let me marry her, and not knowing what they coming with.
mm,
It's so important that like we really, and again, Islam is the solution, because that's why it was important that adults, when I say adults, I mean our parents, were
mm.
involved in our marriages when we were picking spouse, because they understand that point, because they are married. They understand that if their father is like that, they're more likely their son is like that, or their mother is like that, they're more likely, and it passes
Yep.
them. Understand,
But
and they
far
understand
from
you, and they be like,
that.
I know this is gonna work for you, because this is the behaviors that person have, and they understand it. You don't get that in your 20s. I'm just starting to understand that now, and I'm a whole therapist with 15 plus years in the field, and I'm still starting to understand how relational trauma, how your formative years really influence your behavior, isn't it? There's still stuff that I'm uncovering as I get older, even about myself. And I'll be like, dang, I can't believe. Um, I don't know if like I'm writing a memoir,
Mm,
and I had typed something out, and I looked at the sentence, and I said, even as I'm writing this is a dysfunctional statement.
mm,
Remember what it was, but I just remember saying it in the book because I wanted people to understand that when you become traumatized, it really influences your whole being, every single thing,
mm,
everything. It could even influence so much so of colors you don't like. I remember I was reading something where the lady, she had got raped by this guy, but she never saw his face, but she remember him having a red cat. And she said, in every sentence, she hated red. But imagine if you was a child and that happened, and then you can't understand why every time you see red, you just irritated and irritable.
mm,
And then you got your husband, and he walking around the house with a red t-shirt, and then you snapping, you like, what the hell did I do? But you don't even understand. That's
That's
important, to give each other's grace, because you really don't know demons that people may be battling, because sometimes they don't even know what demons they battling themselves. I've had many people where they didn't even realize that their parents was abusive. I was doing a session with a girl, and she was saying how her dad used to always say, you don't love me. And I was like, that's abusive to say that to a child. Like, what? But her and him and the mom was like, would say crazy things. So I was like, do you think that's abuse? And she was like, you know what? It is. And she's in her 30s, just realizing that all her life she was emotionally and mentally abused. And we think that we know stuff, but we don't know. So you look at behaviors and you ask yourself, one, why am I doing it? Or why do you think that they doing it?
mm,
What happened to you? Like my professor used to say that all the time. He said, I stopped asking people. Well, he did say why. He did say he stopped asking people why they do stuff. But he'd be like, what happened to you? Because when you find out what happened to people, it gives you more empathy and grace. Like
mm,
that. That's a shame. Because I always, like, because I'm very open about my story. And, like when I was a kid, like I was sexually abused. And when I got married, and my husband leaned in to kiss me, I was like, and he was like, he's like, why you like that? And I'm like, I don't know. Like it didn't even dawn on me. And then when I was sitting there thinking, I was like, you know what? I've never kissed anyone ever.
Mm.
Because my experience of intimacy, my first experiences of intimacy, which was a violation, it didn't have that aspect to it.
Mm.
That's how I learned about intimacy. It's dysfunctional. So now what do I do? You know, whatever they may be. But you just